times the size of the Golden Gate Bridge. But no bridge anywhere captures the...
Okay, let me stop. Okay. Let's see if that's it.
The hearts and minds and spirits of the people who visit it, like the Golden Gate Bridge does.
Go get Jeremiah and come here. Please, go get Jeremiah. Jeremiah! Go get him. I want to show him something. I want to show him something. Go get him. I want to show him this bridge. Jeremiah! Jeremiah! I'll try to wait till you get here.
Adding to the bridge's artfulness
This is
is
in
the arch at its
California.
south end. It wasn't necessary
Did
from an
you go
engineering
across this
standpoint.
bridge?
It was incorporated into the design for the sole
This is
purpose
the
of
Golden
preserving
Gate Bridge in
historic
California.
Fort Point, a relic outpost from the Civil War.
It would have been cheaper to
Look,
demolish the
did you
fort,
go across that
and there's
bridge?
no reason to
Did
stay
you?
at the fort
Did you guys go
other
across
than
that? Did you get to
respect
go?
for those that went before
Was
us.
Look at this bridge. Did
The
you go
origins of
across
the
that?
need for the Golden Gate Bridge can be traced back to 1848, when gold was discovered in the
we
hills
talked about
northeast
the
of
gold.
San Francisco. As gold fever attracted legions of fortune hunters,
Gold
the
fever?
city's population soared
Gold
more than
fever?
7,000% in just 2 years.
They all went to gold, didn't they?
With bountiful wealth came all the pleasures of the flesh. Drinking, gambling, opium, and prostitution helped give San Francisco's waterfront, the Barbary Coast, a reputation for hedonistic abandon. To puritanical America, there was a suggestion of divine retribution,
See if it shows more of the bridge, because this is...
but he also had a
Maybe it's just a very...
he was in the depths of the Depression, and men were hungry for work.
I'm told stories by people who are still
It's a
alive.
bridge, isn't it?
As the Golden Gate Bridge. But no bridge anywhere captures the hearts and minds and spirits of the people who visit it, like the Golden Gate Bridge does.
Oh my word, I couldn't do it. Jeremiah, look. Look. Look how it goes, the bridge. Look. 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 Look at that, how deep it is. You gonna fall? No, gonna fall?
I want to do that, but I go.
I don't want to go across that bridge. You want to see this other bridge right here? Oh, yeah. that's
Soaring
the-
high above San Francisco Bay,
Oh.
the New Bay Bridge is one of the busiest bridges on the
Oh, my word, look
planet.
at how many cars. Look, Jeremiah.
But keeping all these drivers safe
Oh, my
is a major
word!
challenge.
That's so many cars.
A
Helicopter.
mega earthquake could strike
Oh,
any
my
day.
word.
The potential for an earthquake disaster is monumental.
Yeah, California has a lot of earthquakes, and look what
The last
happens.
big earthquake shattered the original bridge.
California has lots of earthquakes. I forgot to talk
Now
about
an even
that
bigger
today.
quake is due to hit.
We're 5 years overdue for a very large event, and it could happen any second.
It could happen anytime. Oh, grab the
Building
shape.
a new bridge that could stand up to this cataclysmic force of nature
know.
seemed impossible.
You can't-
Necessity is the mother of invention. The bridge design team was challenged to do
Wow.
something that no other bridge design team had ever been asked to do
I
before.
can do that.
Wow, I know.
We go inside
Wow.
the New Bay Bridge to reveal how engineers built it to be indestructible.
Wow. That's how they build it. You can sit here and watch for a minute.
Nature
That's
can
part of
unleash some of the most
California.
destructive forces on the planet.
Oh, my word.
But around the world, engineers are fighting back, determined to build structures that can survive the worst, that are bigger, higher,
Here, you can
and
sit here.
stronger than ever before.
No, it's just a video. Okay, you sit right here. Whoa.
How do they do it?
We're having an earthquake.
Discover the secrets behind engineering the impossible,
I didn't do that.
building indestructible megastructures. San Francisco, California. Built on a narrow peninsula of land on the Pacific coast. San Francisco is surrounded by water.
I know.
Giant bridges
I know.
are the vital links
I
that
know.
connect the city to
I
millions
know.
of people on all sides of the
Some
bay.
cars will fall, but some cars will fall.
The Golden
but
Gate
some
Bridge
cars
is the most
won't.
iconic of San Francisco's bridges, and one of the most famous bridges
That's
in the
one
world.
of them.
looks aren't everything. Six miles to the east, the Bay Bridge is the city's real workhorse. Spanning 4.5 miles of water between San Francisco and Oakland, the Bay Bridge is not just one bridge. It's two that meet on a rocky island in the middle of the bay. Over 100 million vehicles cross this bridge every year. And the new East Span is a marvel of engineering. A bridge that soars 525 feet above the bay and spans 2.2 miles of water. The widest bridge in the world, the longest single-towered suspension bridge ever built, and the only bridge to hang from one single cable. It's a critical lifeline for millions of people. Morning rush hour. A time of day when some 280,000 vehicles cross the Bay Bridge. Without it, San Francisco would grind to a halt. Yet it's one of the world's most vulnerable bridges, because it's built right on top of one of the deadliest geological features on the planet, the Pacific Ring of Fire. Fracturing our planet is a 25,000-mile fault line. Along this line, the vast moving plates of rock that make up the Earth's crust crash together, generating 90% of all the world's earthquakes. The state of California lies on a transform boundary, an area where two continental plates endlessly grind past each other. The movement causes massive tears in the Earth's crust called faults. In California, the two most dangerous are the San Andreas Fault to the west and the Hayward Fault to the east. Smack bang in the middle is the Bay Bridge. Either fault could unleash a major earthquake that could strike the bridge head-on. But it's not just a theory. In 1989, the 7 million people of San Francisco Bay learned just how vulnerable they were. It was just past 5 p.m. Suddenly, 60 miles to the south, the San Andreas Fault wrenched apart by 8 feet, releasing 20 times as much energy than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Seconds later, the shock waves reached San Francisco Bay.
Right off the bat, of all the earthquakes I've experienced in my life, this was the biggest.
The 6.9 magnitude quake shook the Bay Area for only 15 seconds. The toll, though, was devastating. $6 billion worth of damage, thousands injured, and 63 people dead. Homes sank into the ground. Roads crumpled. The east span of the Bay Bridge was torn apart.
The westbound section has collapsed into the eastbound section.
A 250-ton, 50-foot section of the upper deck had collapsed. Bruce Stephen was crossing the bridge when the quake struck.
I was coming back over from Oakland. I was going up the ramp to get to the higher part of the bridge, and the car started to shake. And then there was the sensation of dropping. I thought the whole bridge was falling, and I screamed out, "We're gonna die," and I blacked out.
When Bruce came to, his car was hanging hundreds of feet above the water.
I was looking at the water. I had no idea why my car stopped. I had no idea why I wasn't in the water. My thought was to get out as fast as humanly possible. I didn't expect to come out of that car alive.
That day, only one person died on the bridge, but the collapse impacted the lives of millions of people as it severed the vital link between Oakland and San Francisco.
We had no ability to send resources to help out, and they were calling for resources that took away a lifeline to San Francisco. No one was going on bridges that day or even the next day.
Families were cut off from loved ones. 20 days for workers to repair the bridge. The disruption plunged the area's economy into freefall. It lost almost $3 billion in the subsequent 2 months. San Francisco could not afford for that to happen again.
One of the people got it.
So, in 1997, city planners on both sides of the bay made a pledge. They promised to replace the old eastern span with something that could survive a megaquake. For the engineers, it seemed an impossible challenge. How could they construct the new bridge to be virtually indestructible?
The whole bridge is carried by this tower, and it's very important that this tower, after an earthquake, still can carry the load.
The new east span of the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge is one of the most seismically advanced bridges in the world. And it has to be. A megaquake could strike any day.
It's a huge challenge to build in an earthquake country. There are surface waves that come across that actually make the ground roll like the ocean as well as shake side to side like this. And those are the waves that do the damage.
To build a new bridge that could survive these forces, engineers first had to understand what went wrong in 1989. Why did the original bridge fail so catastrophically in that last major quake? One of those investigating the problem was engineer Marvin Nader.
In 1989, when the earthquake occurred, about 60 miles south of here, the bridge got pulled to the east, and this panel in front of me right here fell onto the lower deck.
The shock waves beneath the roadway simply pulled the bridge apart.
During the earthquake, the ground was basically flexing the structure back and forth. The bridge wasn't designed to take those kind of movements.
In 1989, the old bridge stayed standing, but only just. Any day, the big one could strike. A possible magnitude 8 megaquake, over 40 times more powerful. One such megaquake hit San Francisco Bay in 1906. It killed thousands, left over 200,000 people homeless, and virtually flattened San Francisco. Engineers know that another quake of this intensity would destroy the original east span of the Bay Bridge.
If such an earthquake occurs, this bridge would sustain much longer damage and would probably collapse into the bay.
A radical new design was needed. And for inspiration, the engineers looked at the 2 bridges that had survived the 1989 quake intact. The Golden Gate Bridge and the west span of the Bay Bridge. And asked, why? The answer, both are suspension bridges. The roads hang from cables and can sway in a quake.
Think of a swing where you're sitting on the swing and the earthquake occurs. You will probably feel very little. That's exactly why the Golden Gate and the Western Span did not fail.
Suspended from 2 towers, each locked into solid bedrock with massive foundations. 2 giant cables carry the roadway that hangs beneath them. So when a quake hits, the roads sway like a swing. A new high-tech suspension bridge was the ideal solution for the East Bay. But when engineers looked at the geology below the water, they realized there was a problem. There was nothing to build on but soft mud, hundreds of feet deep.
Everything that's down here at this low level, from the Hayward Fault to the west, is soft material, what we call bay fill. To take a look at this stuff, this is about the last thing you would want to build on.
Mud is dangerous because of how it behaves in a quake. When the earth ruptures, the force sends shockwaves out through the earth's crust. In solid bedrock, the waves are short and fast, but in mud, the shockwaves are amplified, making them much more destructive.
It's like a gel. You can see here, I'm kind of getting sinking into it. And this stuff is going to shake like crazy, right? It's going to be a very, very active area out here. And really, who knows what's going to happen?
Building a tower for a suspension bridge here on the eastern shore was not an option. But across the water, right in the middle of the bay, is a rocky island, a perfect place to build one tower. So, could Marvin Nader's team dare the seemingly impossible and build a bridge suspended not from two towers, but just one? Getting that one tower right would be vital.
All the load is carried by this single tower, and it's very important that this tower, after an earthquake, still can carry the load.
First, concrete foundations driven 200 feet into solid bedrock would lock the tower into the ground. Then a roadway above would balance like a seesaw, with a giant cable holding the structure in place. The tower would not only have to carry the weight of the roadway and the cable, but the traffic too, 5 lanes on each side. Together, that's over 40,000 tons the tower has to hold up, the weight of a cargo ship. It's a daring design with many inherent risks. This tower needs more than just stable foundations if it's going to stand up to a mega quake, because the higher you go, the more quake tremors become amplified. How could engineers design the 50-story tower to survive?
There are 2 ways to resist the earthquake, either by resisting the forces or being able to flex with the earthquake. We have learned that it's much more important to be able to be flexible, to take the movements of the earthquake and to dance to the rhythm of the earthquake.
The first key to making the tower flexible was to construct it from a material that would bend, steel. The second was to build the tower out of 4 separate shafts that could move independently, absorbing the earthquake's energy.
Instead of the tower behaving like this, it starts behaving like this.
Although the 4 shafts are separate, in a quake they can still act as a single structure because of one innovation: shear link beams. Designed to bend and flex, they act like crumple zones, deforming so the tower won't collapse. Engineers decided if anything on the tower was going to break, they wanted it to break here.
Very much like the fender on your car. When an accident occurs, the fender takes the bump. And when the bump occurs, the fender crumbles, but you're safe. The car is still drivable, and you can take it to the mechanic to fix it when the time is right. The shear links along the height do very much the same thing.
Just like car bumpers, the shear links can be replaced easily. Job done in just a few days.
It's a matter of going in, unbolting these bolts, taking that component out, and replacing it with a new one. But the key is they don't have to be replaced for opening the bridge.
Normally used on buildings, this was the first time shear link beams had ever been tried on a bridge. 120 of them transformed the 4 shafts into a single tower 525 feet high. But building it requires precision engineering. Get it wrong, and the whole bridge could come crashing down.
I'm just hoping we're not wrong here. I'm hoping the engineers got it right.
San Francisco Bay's new bridge has a revolutionary design. Half elevated skyway, half suspension bridge. At the west end, over 2,000 feet of road, 10 lanes wide, hangs from just one shock-absorbing tower. And engineers had to build this tower like no other, because 2 of the most active earthquake faults in the US rip through the landscape on either side.
The probability of having a large earthquake occur in the Bay Area is 60% in the next 30 years.
Experts predict that the next big one will come from the fault closest to the new bridge, the Hayward Fault. Investigating just how dangerous this seismic hotspot is geologist Luther Strayer.
There are actually quite a few great places to see the active trace of the Hayward Fault in Hayward. This is the corner of Rose and Prospect, and you can see that the fault is marked by a series of systematic fractures that are telling us that this block over here is heading northward towards Alaska, while this block here appears to be staying stationary and pretty much attached to North America. The fault runs probably right under that fence, and then over through this neighborhood here. This is a fundamentally huge fracture in the Earth's crust.
Over the years, the ground movement has become clearly visible.
What we're seeing down here is an offset of a curve that was poured in the 70s, and we see a significant amount of offset here, maybe about 8 or 10 inches. What we see here was not accomplished during a single earthquake, but by something that we call creep.
Creep happens when the plates grind past each other without causing earthquakes. Cracks in walls and curbs reveal that at the surface, the ground is constantly shearing. But deep below the surface, scientists know the plates are stuck together.
At depth, the problem is it's not slipping. All right? We call that a lock section of a fault.
It's a disaster waiting to happen. While the plates are locked, the geological forces behind them continue building towards breaking point.
What we're seeing here is that at the surface, it can easily move by each other because there's just no pressure on the rocks. But at depth, there's huge pressures against the surface of the fault. And you can just like with your hands, if you don't have much pressure, it's easy to slide. But if your hands are pushed together, it's very difficult to slip. And when it does it catastrophically.
It's this sudden slip that generates massive earthquakes. Bad news for the Bay's 7 million residents and the Bay Bridge. And geologists calculate a big one is long overdue.
Our records show that large earthquakes on the Hayward Fault occur about every 140 years. And right now we're at 145 years. So we're 5 years overdue for a very large event.
Building anything that can withstand this is a major challenge, let alone a seemingly fragile bridge tower.
When the big one occurs, this area will be devastated.
To combat the danger, engineers would take no chances. Each of the 4 shafts was made from 5 sections of steel, bolted one on top of the other. This section weighs over 1 million pounds, nearly as much as a fully loaded super jumbo jet. A strand jack winched the sections upright and hoisted them hundreds of feet into the air before lowering them into place. Thousands of bolt holes then had to line up exactly so that one section could be locked tightly to the next. This is precision engineering with no room for error. The groundbreaking design of 4 independent legs and state-of-the-art shear link beams allows the central tower to sway by a massive 5 feet in a quake. To be quake-proof, though, it was not just about the tower. Everything about the new suspension span had to be engineered to be flexible, including the roadway. And this challenge would push the designers to the limit. Scientists predict that a mega quake could strike San Francisco at any moment. And when it does, the new east span of the Oakland Bay Bridge will need to stay standing. In 1989, the last quake tore the old bridge apart. How could engineers stop the same thing happening to the road decks on the new bridge? First, the decks were constructed from steel that would bend without cracking. Built in 28 separate colossal sections, the engineers' first challenge was to lift the section into place, a mammoth task. These sections, each 5 lanes wide, topped 1,000 tons apiece. Getting them hundreds of feet above the water took the biggest crane barge on the US West Coast. At nearly the size of a football field, it has a boom over 30 stories high. But it was more than just heavy lifting. Operators had to ensure that the sections lined up to within 1/10 of an inch, because the next step was to connect the sections together.
We're inside the suspension bridge. There are many units of steel here, many pieces of steel, some of them the size of a building. And we need to connect those in such a way that they behave as one unit acting together. And the way we connect them, in many cases, with bolts.
Teams of steel workers used 4,500 threaded bolts to fasten each section to the next.
Isn't that cool how they make
Connecting
the
them
bridges?
this securely means that in a quake, the steel road decks can act as one unit and flex without fear of failing. With the road deck now completed, engineers face their final challenge: to suspend the roadway from the tower.
The cable of this bridge is the next most important thing on the bridge. Obviously, the tower is carrying the whole bridge, but the cable needs to carry the load off the roadway to the tower.
Like the rest of the bridge, Nader's innovative design tore up the rule book. For the first time ever, instead of 2 cables, this suspension bridge would have only 1. Attached to the roadway itself, the cable stretches over the central tower, loops underneath 10 lanes of traffic, before returning to lock back into the roadway.
The cable is not anchored into the ground, it is self-anchored, meaning the cable is anchored into the roadway. This is a first of its kind.
Looping under the bridge means the single cable can hold up the road decks and pull the whole structure together, making it tighter and stronger. This nearly mile-long cable is made up of over 17,000 individual steel wires. Placed end-to-end, it would stretch more than halfway around the world. And all these wires have to be placed precisely or the cable could fail. Engineers designed robots to haul the strands of wire up and over the tower, beneath the roadway, and back in. A painstaking job that took over 5 months. Finally, the strands of wire were compressed so that they would act as one super thick cable. Workers used 200 steel suspender ropes to link the cable to the road decks. At last, the moment of truth. Would the tower and the single cable support the weight of the 35,000-ton roadway?
The moment that I was proudest of was when liftoff occurred, because from a structural perspective, that was the self-anchored suspension bridge being born. I mean, that was the moment.
Everything held just as predicted. The suspension bridge is perfectly balanced, supported firmly by the single central tower. The new bridge is a model of flexibility. A flexible tower, flexible road decks, and a 5,000-ton steel cable will allow the whole bridge to sway and bend in a quake without being torn apart.
During a large earthquake, the bridge is going to wobble and sway. It is going to move up and down. People are going to see a sense of a wave on the bridge.
Making the bridge sway and move is vital in an earthquake. But engineers also had to make sure that the bridge wouldn't flex too much. Because as well as quakes, this bridge faces another force of nature: wind.
History, physics, engineering has taught us in the past that wind in the environment, or at least in an environment like this, can be very damaging to a bridge.
Though built to withstand potential wind gusts of up to 144 miles per hour, sometimes more moderate winds of around 30 miles per hour can also pose a problem if they happen to hit the bridge side on.
When structures are shallow, like an airplane wing, they can start to move. As the wind blows around
Shallow
the structure,
means nothing's in it.
there's the potential
Shallow
for the
means
wind
it's
as
hollow.
it comes around a wing
very,
to start
very
to
small.
create vortexes. And they can start to vibrate the structure, moving it up and down.
In 1940, wind played havoc on the newly opened Tacoma Narrows Suspension Bridge in the state of Washington. As 40 miles per hour winds blew over it, the thin, flexible road decks started to twist and vibrate.
Have you ever been on an airplane, you looked out the window and you saw the airplane wing moving up and down? That might be fine for an airplane wing because it's designed for that. We don't want our bridge structures moving up and down, and if you will, maybe even getting to flutter. That can actually cause a collapse.
4 months after it opened, wind gusts tore the Tacoma Narrows Bridge apart. The disaster forced engineers to radically redesign suspension bridges to withstand the potentially devastating wind effect. And to counteract vibrations of up to 1.5 feet on the Bay Bridge, they came up with vortex plates.
These are plates that we've actually added to the bottom of this structure to manage the wind as it flows around the structure.
They may not look like much, but these diagonal rows of thin plates break up the wind vortices on the underside of the bridge.
What these plates do is they redirect the wind particles, and it protects the structure. We believe if we took them off here, the structure would start to vibrate and move too much to unacceptable levels. So these are absolutely critical for the safety of the structure.
These vortex plates allow the road deck of the suspension span to flex in a quake, but limit the flexing in side-on winds. The suspension bridge, however, only spans part of the bay. There was still another mile of water to cross, and engineers knew that this next section would have to be built on the most dangerous type of ground in a quake zone: mud.
It's an engineering nightmare to
We learned about
build
how
in
they
these
built the bridge.
conditions.
It's a phenomenal thing. They're in California. Did he go across that Golden Gate Bridge?
Connecting San Francisco
I'll
Bay's
show
new
you how to- he's
iconic
fascinating how they
suspension
rated
bridge
it.
to the Oakland shore is the Skyway, two elevated bridges that cross over a mile of water.
We sang 1,500 miles, Golden City.
Engineers wanted to build this part of the bridge in concrete, not steel. But in a quake zone, building concrete bridges can be a recipe for
I used to
disaster,
upload my. I still got to do my sign language and stuff.
as the city of Oakland learned in the quake of 1989. A 1.25 mile section of two-tier elevated freeway was destroyed.
There's a hell of an earthquake. 25238, we have a major injury accident. Cypress and West Grand, they're advising major injuries.
The top deck collapsed onto the lower one. 42 motorists died. One of the first responders on the scene was Fire Chief Mark Hoffman.
Oh, you mean, and then you mean before you left it? Yeah. Oh. Okay, well, yeah, I still haven't done my sign language. I was waiting. The kids were kind of rowdy, so I was showing them a video. Man, I never thought about that. All that stuff it takes in the bridge to do the bridge.
It was making your favorite lasagna.
Oh, I'm full. I had that spaghetti. I can't. I've already had a donut. I'm supposed to be on my diet. Okay, so I need to go to upload my video. I couldn't get him dressed up today. He wouldn't dress up for me today. I tried. I told him, I said, I want you to dress up because we do puppets and everything. And we'll get a picture. And I picked out that fire. I had it open. And he went. And he said, okay, I'll put it on now. Put it on. Put a picture. My dad. You're going to have to lay out their clothes so that they won't fuss at me. They fussed at me. He did. Yeah, Raven did too, actually. They both fussed at me. I don't even know if that one you took. It looks that. Yep, you're not wearing a mask.